So yesterday we learned the halacha about the way the Alter Rebbe defines or gives guidelines for one who takes on a chumrah, takes on a stringency. And the basic idea was that one should ask himself, what's the reason for his chumrah? And there are either basically three options. Either he's taking on the stringency because he's holding himself back, he's using it as a safeguard so it doesn't falter into some prohibition, even the lowest and the most minor quote-unquote of prohibitions. And then that's a good reason to take on a chumrah. Option number two is that through this chumrah, through this added stringency, there adds a hiddur mitzvah, beauty to his mitzvah, and that's also okay, and that's why it's okay to include scoring, to include scratches on your tefillin parchment, even though you're not required to do so, because it adds beauty. Certainly it's straighter than it would be without them. The lines are straighter, more even. And then the third option is, if he's doing a chumrah, he's doing a stringency, simply to show off. In that case, the Shulchan Aruch says is a hedget, mourning.
Okay. How long are you here for?
Till the 14th.
Oh, for okay, 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
So,
Yeah, I'm excited.
yeah. So in that case, he's a hedget. That's what the Shulchan Aruch said. And the example we gave was someone who sits in the sukkah in the rain. Sitting in the sukkah in the rain, he said, is a hedget because there's no beauty to the mitzvah. It's not required. It doesn't hold you back from doing any prohibition. So it seems like it's just a hedget. That's what it seems like. That's what it says. Now, we weren't planning on doing this, but of course everybody wants to know why Chabad sits in the sukkah in the rain if the Shulchan Aruch called the person a hedget. And as I noted, when Rabbi talks about the extent of chumrah that Chabad does with sitting in the sukkah, that even when you're drinking water, you're not required to, and even when you're sitting in the rain, Rabbi writes it as if that even when the Shulchan Aruch calls you a hedget, Chabad's still sitting in the sukkah. So what's the story? So I mentioned that the Minchas Elazar has a responsa which says that it's still a mitzvah nonetheless, even though the Shulchan Aruch calls it a hedget. And I wasn't going to do this, but upon request, we'll look at the Minchas Elazar. So we have it in front of us. The Minchas Elazar is section 4, Chelek Daled, of the Minchas Elazar's responsa, Siman Lamed Aleph. So it's how do you translate the word Siman? Chapter? Or responsa number 31, towards the end. So it's the last paragraph on the left there in the page Chav Ches. It's volume 4. Now, as I mentioned, the beginning of this response, it talks about eating in the sukkah on Shmini Atzeres. It seems like that wasn't the custom in Munkach, which is where Minchas Elazar is the Rebbe of Munkach. And someone's writing about this. Minchas Elazar was a fiery, passionate Jew. With his fiery passion comes through in his writing, as we'll see. And at the end of his tshuva, he kind of writes, since we're on the topic of sitting in the sukkah, I'll write to you about us sitting in the sukkah in the rain and why we do that. And now the last paragraph on the bottom left, and we'll see how much we can get through, at least the main points. It's not very long, but okay. More on this topic. Concerning our custom, that we've got from our forefathers, from our fathers, from Rabbi Seinu, and from our teachers, Hakadoshim, the holy ones, our holy fathers and teachers, generation after generation, going back to the students of the Baal Shem Tov HaKadosh, may his memory be a blessing for us. And it's our custom, to sit in the sukkah, throughout the 7 days of Sukkot. Even if, God forbid, it should rain, God forbid. And has been written, I think this stands for Chasni V'Zikni, my father-in-law / grandfather. I'm not exactly sure what this means. Maybe it means it's his wife's grandfather, or maybe it's a maternal grandfather. I'm not sure. But this grandfather of his, the author of the Atzei Eden, which is a commentary on the Mishnah, Soif Perek Beis Sukkah, at the end of chapter 2 of Sukkah, writes as follows: on that which the Mishnah said. The Mishnah says, with respect to someone who sits in the rain in the Sukkah, the Mishnah says like this: Mashlu Mashal. They gave a parable to demonstrate what it looks like for someone who's sitting in the sukkah in the rain. What's the demonstration? Says the Mishnah in Sukkah, La'eved, like a servant, Shemasu Kois Rabbi, who fills up a glass of water, of wine for his master, V'shafach like Kitan Alpanav, and he poured the barrel or the pitcher on him, on his face. End quote. I'm translating literally for a specific reason. The Mishnah says that the parable is of a servant who brings a glass of water or wine to his master, and then he pours a pitcher on his face. So who's the he? So the Gemara asks, the Gemara inquires, right? Iboya, as I mentioned a few times, whenever the Gemara introduces a question with Iboya, it means it's an inquiry, not a challenge or anything like that. It just means what the Gemara wants to know. So the Gemara inquires, Mi shafach lemi? Who's pouring the water on whom? Is it the servant, that is the Jew, pouring the water on the master Hashem, in that he's sitting in the sukkah in the rain, and that's the parable? Or is it the reverse, that the rain is like the water being poured on our heads by Hashem? Hashem's pouring the water on us. Which one is it? So upashtinon, and the Gemara resolves this inquiry by saying, that the teacher poured the water on the student, the master poured the water on the student. That is to say, the rain is like Hashem pouring water on our heads when we're bringing him a glass of water in the sukkah. This is what the Gemara says. Clear? So with me. So comments the Yatzei Eden, the grandfather of the author here, the Minchas Elazar. The Anafka Minna Deiboya. What's the difference? What the parable is? Who cares? Whether we're pouring the water in Hashem's face or Hashem's pouring it in our face, what's the difference? Very simple. So it says the Yatzei Eden like this: if the parable is that the student, the Jew, is pouring the water in his master's face, in God's face, God forbid, then it would be forbidden to be machmer, to be stringent, and sit in the sukkah. That's audacity towards heaven. So in other words, like this: if the Mishnah's parable is that the Jew is pouring the water in God's face, then you're not allowed to sit in the sukkah because it's chutzpah. And that's what the Gemara wants to know. What's the parable? Is the parable that the Jew is pouring the water in God's face, or is the parable that God's pouring the water in the Jew's face? And if the parable is that the Jew is pouring the water in God's face, then that would mean, get out of the sukkah. You're pouring water in God's face. Go out. Now, the ima perush, but if the meaning of the parable is as the Gemara resolves it, that the master is pouring the water on the student's face, on the servant's face, that is, God's pouring the water on our face by raining on us when we're bringing him a glass of water, metaphorically speaking, by eating in the sukkah. Is then if he nonetheless doesn't leave sukkah, because he wants to be more pious, it's considered more pious. In other words, like this: the very fact that the Gemara asks which way the parable is going is because the Gemara wants to know, are you allowed to stay in the sukkah after it continues raining? Because if the story is that the Jew is pouring the water in God's face, then certainly you can't stay there. But if it says God's pouring it in your face, okay, so God's pouring it in your face, but that doesn't mean you have to leave. You take the hit, so to speak. And therefore he says, from the fact that the Gemara resolves, this is the Yatzei Eden speaking, from the fact that the Gemara resolves and says that the parable is that God pours it in our face, the Gemara is alluding to you, or indicating to you, that you're allowed to stay in the sukkah, even though you're not required. Okay. You don't need to agree, we just need to understand.
I'm okay.
That's all.
I'm okay.
Now, v'ayin v'igir de Pirka, see a book called Igir de Pirka, l'zikni ha'goy l'kadosh zal, to my grandfather, another grandfather, I suppose, of the Munkacher Rebbe. B'tchilas at the beginning, be'inyin damrino and bechagiga, with respect to the which the Gemara says in Chagiga. The Gemara quotes the verse which reads, Shuvu banim shoivavim, return children or returners, or returnees. And the Gemara says chutz ma'acher, with the exception of Acher. Acher is a famous scholar who defected, who left the faith, and the Gemara announces, God announces that everybody can return except for Acher. And the Igor Pirka writes, the Af Bekain loy havali lotis makdosha. Even though he was told that he can't do tshuva, he still shouldn't have left. He should have stayed in holiness. Ki kol masha yomer lach balabayis, because the Mishnah declares that whenever an owner, if a host tells the halacha is that whatever a host tells you to do, you have to listen, with one exception. If he tells you to leave the house. If a host kicks you out of his home, you don't have to listen to him. It's not halacha. Everything else you have to listen to him. So metaphorically speaking, kol masha balabayis shel ha'olam, anything that the host of the world, God, tells you, I say you do, chutz mitzvah, whether, with the exception of if God tells you to get out. So when God declares that no one can do tshuva except for Acher still should have done tshuva, notwithstanding the fact that Hashem says no. And if he doesn't get reward because he's told he's not supposed to do teshuvah. Adrab, on the contrary, zeu min hashleimus. This is a further beauty or a further perfection of his teshuvah that he's doing even without reward, and he's doing teshuvah even when he's not required. V'shelo yachshiv klal kabbalas pras, and he shouldn't take into consideration at all the reward. And as he quotes there in the Igra, the Pirka from our forefathers, and these words are ancient and hallowed out, and now is not the place to go at length in this notion of doing teshuvah even when supposedly you can't do teshuvah. So he's alluding to this idea that just because Hashem tells you get out of doing my mitzvah, it doesn't mean you should stop doing the mitzvah. You keep on doing it anyway, even though you're told not to. And like he proves from the Gemara's, like the Atzei Eden proves from the Gemara's resolution that it's God pouring the water on us versus us pouring on the water on us, that's not forbidden to stay in there. It's just that you don't have to.
The halacha is that
you don't have to.
You don't have to, but should you?
The halacha even says that you're a hedyot, which means it's like an immature thing to do. And yet he's staying, you still stay in. And that's the custom of Hasidim, to still stay in. This is what we're kind of trying to understand now, is why Hasidim have this custom to still stay in. So the first thing he proves is that it's not forbidden. That's the first thing he proves, by the very fact that the Gemara's parable is that the water is being poured on us versus us pouring the water on Hashem. So it's not forbidden. And then he kind of alludes to in the parenthesis that if it's not forbidden, then maybe you should press. In the same way, when you're told not to do teshuvah, you still do teshuvah. So you're told not to stay in the sukkah, you still stay in the sukkah. So long as it's not forbidden. And now he adds even more. Moreover, miroiv simchas mitzvah, from the great intense joy he has in fulfilling the mitzvah, he doesn't feel the rain. And this is the true mark of the Chabad Chassid. Not the guy who's sitting in the rain and is annoyed that he's a Lubavitcher, he has to sit in the rain. That's not the way a Chassid sits in the rain. A Chassid sits in the rain because how could you leave the sukkah? The sukkah is so enjoyable. What, the rain's going to get in my way? The Ein Mistar. And he has no pain from the fact that it's raining. This is the way a Chassid approaches the sukkah. Rain's going to make me uncomfortable in the sukkah. And therefore he says, if I feel no pain because of the rain, M'choyev le'shibah, I'm actually required to sit there because I feel no pain sitting in the rain. So why should I leave the sukkah? And if I feel no pain because of the rain, then I have to stay in the sukkah. The gam bebayis, because the halacha is that if in my home, this is the Atzei Eden, it's still all the Atzei Eden speaking. That is the Munkach Rebbe is quoting the Atzei Eden. The in bebayis, the gam bebayis, that likewise in my home, if I had a simcha in my home, that was such a great simcha b'beisa, I wouldn't leave. I don't know, it's my children's wedding. So it starts leaking in the rain. So what? You keep on dancing because it's your children's wedding. So if I had that kind of joy, even though it's raining in my home, I wouldn't leave my home. Then I'm not supposed to leave the sukkah. Because Allah is, the only time you're required to leave your sukkah is if under the same circumstance you would leave your home. So because if I had such great joy in my home, I wouldn't care for the rain. So I have such great joy from the mitzvah of sukkah. I'm not leaving in the rain. Hey, go see the Ramah there where he gives this requirement for comparing the way you would treat your home to the way you would speak to sukkah. Therefore, now he proves from the Rif. So before I get to understanding how the Rif works and the Rush, it works like this. The Rif is a Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, who's from the first Sephardic halachic decisors, from the first, predates even the Rambam, I believe. Correct? Predates the Rambam.
100 years.
100 years. Yitzchak Alfasi. And the way he works is like this. He didn't codify the Shulchan Aruch, he didn't codify the Jewish law in sections the way the Rambam did or the Shulchan Aruch did. The way he did it is, he took the Gemara and he removed any parts of the Gemara that aren't necessary for halacha, and that way we know the conclusion. So the Gemara brings it back and forth with 6 opinions arguing back and forth. He'll cut it all out and just leave the quote of the final conclusion, and you know how he rules that way. So based on what he quotes and what he doesn't quote, you know what halacha is. Because it was before a time when people bold enough to write their own commentary. Their own commentary was okay, but their own code. Yeah, writing your own code of Jewish law was a novelty of the Rambam. Yeah. Once the Rambam paved the way, it's become more accepted later. But to write your own code, there's a Gemara is the code of Jewish law. What are you adding your own code for? So, but the Gemara is too complicated to come to a conclusion. So what the Rif did was, he took the Gemara and cut out the complication and left you the simple conclusion. So based on what the Rif quotes and doesn't quote, you know what the halacha is. Now the interesting thing is that he quotes obviously the Mishnah which says that you're not supposed to that you don't have to sit in the rain, and he quotes the Mishnah's parable of the water being poured, but then he adds something else. He also quotes the Gemara's question as to which way the parable goes. Is the parable that God's pouring the water on us, or we're pouring the water on God? And the question is, why is that question necessary for halacha? Just say that you don't have to sit in the rain because it's a parable of pouring water. Why quote the question? Because the question has a halachic application. What's the halachic application? Whether or not you're allowed to stay in there when it keeps on raining. And that's why the Rif quotes it. So the fact that the Rif quotes that question is proof that the Rif and the Rosh are of the view that even though you're not required to sit in the sukkah, you're allowed to sit in the sukkah. And that's why they quote that question. Following? So let's see. And therefore, because there is a halachic application from the question as to who is pouring the water on who, that's why the Rif and the Rosh quoted this question. Who poured the water on who? To indicate to you that there is a practical application as to which way the parable goes, and because the conclusion is that the parable is God's pouring the water on us, therefore the implication is that it's not forbidden to sit in there. Now, if it's not forbidden to sit in there, and you are enjoying yourself, then you shouldn't leave. That's the sum total. Because he proves in halacha that you're allowed to sit in there, and if you're a chassid who enjoys sitting in the sukkah notwithstanding the rain, because it's such a simcha shel mitzvah, then you shouldn't leave. And this is the way the righteous Hasidim have practiced since the time of the Baal Shem Tov, as he writes, Asher lahem, praise be to them, v'asher chelkam, and praise is their lot. Ad kan l'shena ba'atzei Eden. End quote of the Atzei Eden. V'divrei pi chacham chen. It's a verse which says the words of the mouth of the wise are graceful. It's a verse which when someone wants to throw his weight behind somebody else's words, he'll add that line. And as I mentioned, the Munkach Rebbe is a very passionate writer, and it kind of comes through. This is the gist of it. We'll do a few more lines because he's going to mention the counter view.
Just like it's interesting that you have different levels of people. So, for example, I see a comparison with a tzaddik or a Rabbi. There were people who didn't take any sedatives for operation, during an operation. They were able to focus their mind on the Torah.
Yeah, I don't think you need that level for sitting in the rain in the sukkah. I'm not at that level. If I had an operation, God forbid, I would definitely take a sedative, and yet I enjoy myself in the rain in the sukkah, and I'm not so holy. And the same thing is true of hundreds and thousands of chassidim who sit in the rain in the sukkah and they enjoy. And I have to tell you, the best vibrangens in the sukkah happen in the rain. Just the way it goes.
Okay.
Anyway.
I'm just trying to point out there's different levels of people.
That's for sure true. And I just want to also say that you don't have to agree with what he's saying. But you need to understand it at least. And that's what we're trying to do here, to at least understand it. Now, it's a good diuk, right? Now, he says like this. Brings the carbon asanil, and the carbon asanil, which is a classic commentary on the Rosh. The Rosh is
what is it, by
the carbon asanil is a classic commentary on the Rosh. The Rosh, which is Reish Aleph Shin, stands for Rabbeinu Asher, who is an early Ashkenazi halachic decider. Actually, not so early. The father Baal Turim, actually towards the end of the Rishonim. I shouldn't say he's early. He's later. He's two generations before the end of the Rishonim. He's post Rashi, towards the end of the Tosfos. Probably somewhere there, yeah. And the Achronim start already a generation or so later, 2 generations later. At any rate, the Carbon Hasan is a commentary on the Rosh, and he writes. Now, as I mentioned, the Rosh is one of those people. The Rif and the Rosh quoted this question as to which way the example goes, and the Atzei Eden uses as an indication to prove that the halacha is you're allowed to stay in the sukkah. Okay, so the Carbon Hasan al-Kosev Raya Lahepech, he writes a proof the other way. He says the exact opposite. He says that the fact that the Rif and the Rosh quoted that question as to who poured the water on whom, is it us pouring it on God or God pouring it on us? He says that the reason is because they want to tell you that you're not allowed to stay in there, and that's why it brings that back and forth. So says the Mukkach Rebbe, I don't understand what he's saying. If the Carbon Hasan is right that the reason why the question was quoted is to tell you you're not allowed to sit in there, what's the difference in the question as to who poured it on who? Which the Rosh quoted Ladina for halacha. In your view, that you're not allowed to come into the sukkah anyway. Whichever way you take the parable, whether the servant poured the water on the master, us pouring the water on God, or God pours it on us, upon of the picture on our faces, whichever way you go, it's no good. It's disgraceful for us and it's forbidden to sit in the sukkah. In other words, the Chabad is saying.
I know, but look at the lesson. It's not. It's making the idea. It says "Ein rashai l'hachmer." It's not allowed to. It doesn't say asar. According to what he says originally is right. Okay. According to the first opinion, it
so let's see. Let's see.
Here,
okay, I hear what you're saying, but let me first finish what you're saying. But you're right. I'm going to add that. 1 second. That's a good point. Good point. But the Rosh Hashanah is saying like this: if you are telling me that it's disgraceful, either way the parable goes, then it would seem like there's no reason to have this back and this. Well, I'm going to give it a second. Let's understand it, and then I'll give you. I'll give it to you. I'll give you due. Just give me a minute. So just to explain what the Munkach Rebbe is saying. The Munkach Rebbe is saying like this. Shalom Aleichem. Good morning.
Say Shalom Aleichem twice.
Good morning. Shalom Aleichem.
I haven't seen you in a week.
Let's finish this. Sorry. So the Munkach Rebbe is saying like this, that if the Carbon Asanal is saying, if either way, whether the master's pouring the water on the student or on the servant, or the servant's pouring the water on the master, if either way it's bizayon, if either way it's disgraceful, then it should be forbidden either way. And if there's no reason to care for which way the parable goes, if either way comes to disgrace. The Rabbi Gimel is pointing out that there is a distinction, even if they're both disgraceful. One is disgraceful and you shouldn't do it, and one is completely forbidden.
Exactly. Wait.
Yeah, but anyway, the Munkach Rebbe is saying if it's disgraceful, it should be forbidden. In the Munkach Rebbe's view, disgrace equals forbidden, and therefore So he's saying that there is disgrace which isn't forbidden. In other words, but the Munkach Rebbe is saying if it's disgraceful, it should be forbidden. Okay, I'm giving both sides of the coin. The point being, the Munkach Rebbe is basically saying that in his view, disgrace, if something is disgraceful, it should equal forbidden, even though one could argue the other way. But the Munkach Rebbe is saying that disgrace equals forbidden, and therefore, if your view is that either way, whichever way the parable goes, is disgraceful, then what's the difference which way you take? If disgrace equals forbidden. If that's the case, by the very fact that there's options given means that if the master is pouring it on us, it's not forbidden at all. And therefore he's making his logic. Because it's not forbidden, and you are enjoying it anyway, so stay. That's what he's saying.
Because what the commentaries say the difference is if you're pouring
let me just conclude
this
and then we'll go
sure it's forbidden. That's a chutzpah.
Yeah.
But if Hashem is pouring the water on you, he doesn't want your service.
I want to conclude this because we're running out of time.
It's not chutzpah. The first case is chutzpah for sure. It's
yeah.
Because you're taking water on Hashem.
But disgrace. So he's equating disgrace and
between chutzpah and let's say not disgrace. Hashem doesn't want your service. It's like it doesn't want you, but it's not an isser to do it. But if it's a chutzpah, for sure it's an isser.
So see, he's okay with that. He says if it's not.
He's
But he's saying even if the master doesn't want your service, you still do it. That's the point. Yeah. That's why he said about the guy Acher, where the Gemara said that Acher should do tshuva. You still do it. So even if your conclusion is that you shouldn't do it, which everybody agrees it shouldn't because it's called a hedjit, he's still saying to stick to it. And that's the whole point of his whole pilpul here. The whole point here is so long as it's not usher, you stick to it, even if you're told you're a hedjit. That's the point here.
Well, yeah, with Acher,
right,
the guy defines chutzpah.
Exactly. Even though you're told not to do teshuvah, he's still supposed to do teshuvah. And that's what he's saying here. So even if so to say that it's not rashai is not good enough to counter argument for the Minchas Lazar because he's taking that into equation. You're right, it's not rashai. You're right, it's not appropriate, but he's still doing it, and that's the point. So long as it's not forbidden.
That's right.
That's the point he's making. So let's continue going. And therefore the Munkach Rebbe says the way I see it, it's like that Eden. If the parable is that the servant is pouring it on the teacher, then it's forbidden, as mentioned before, because how could you pour water on your master? How could you pour water on Hashem? But because the parable is that the master is pouring it on the servant, and therefore the master is kind of saying, I don't want your service, but nonetheless, as it actually is chassid, you can still stick around, be pious, and stay in the sukkah. And still stay in the sukkah, as mentioned, so long as it's not forbidden. And therefore you have a stark contrast as to which view you take in this way of reading it. And therefore the halachic distinction will be whether or not you're allowed to. Here you can take another copy. Whether or not you're allowed to be stringent. And therefore, if you're pouring it on the master, you're not allowed to be there. But if the master's pouring it on you, even though he's telling you I don't want you there, you're still allowed to be there. And because you enjoy sitting in the sukkah, you stay. And you don't leave the home even when the host kicks you out. That's the parable. The halakha is parable he's going to.
So from you can't ask the question because we don't know, but from Hashem's perspective,
Why is he doing this?
What's preferred from Hashem's perspective?
I guess kind of what the Minchas Loz is telling you is stop worrying about Hashem's perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You do what you have to do, and even if Hashem says, unless God says you're not allowed to do this, go ahead and do it, because it's a mitzvah. So go do it, and you love Hashem's mitzvahs. You have joy in Hashem's mitzvahs, and the fact that it's not so comfortable and Hashem is saying I don't need it doesn't matter. You're persistent. I'm kshei odev, Okay.
So then why I mean, this gets into a whole other issue of the sleeping in the sukkah thing.
Yeah, it's another discussion.
That's a mitzvah to sleep in the sukkah.
That's another discussion.
Why not push and do
That's another discussion which perhaps
right.
There'll be no end to this. Maybe before Sukkot we'll get to that. But for now we raised the issue of the rain, so we're going to go through the rain. But that's a good question. Now, Medina, legal halachically speaking, says the Munkach Rebbe, one could excuse himself from the sukkah, even if it's just a drizzle of rain. Even if there's no food in front of him that's going to get soggy. Ein Simon Tofresh Tamates, go see, tells you the citation, Sif Hei Berama, T'chen Shabbat Ravam Sif Katan Tezvav, T'kishar Macholim Hashmanim Nekrashim, Mach Masakar, if, his citation, and then he says, if fattier foods would freeze or become hard because of the cold, this is the halacha, then you don't have to sit in the sukkah, in theory. But the Munkach Rebbe goes on to say, this is a very common thing in our location. The Munkach, I think, is in Czechoslovakia, if not mistaken. And he said during the time of Sukkot, it's very common that the food gets hard and cold, which means, in theory, everybody can excuse themselves from the sukkah whenever they wanted to, but nobody does it. He's kind of saying, like, if you're looking for ways to get out of the sukkah, you can get out many times. But if you're a chassid, then you have this joy of the mitzvah, then you stay in the sukkah anyway. Sorry?
Lashon writes the same question because he also lived like in White Russia, and he says, look, the rain is something that occurs from time to time, but cold you can't use an excuse. Otherwise, you have no sukkah b'chlal in this country. So that's why you feel it. A third chiluk also with sukkah, you can at least put a heater in, even in their time if it's like a hot, like a samovar or whatever, keep people a bit warm. But that's why cold wouldn't be an example. It's very cold. Right. Otherwise, you don't have sukkahs b'chlal.
That's a chiddush.
Yeah.
Another citation, Siftal. And the same thing is true with many other situations. A person could. The point he's making is that if a person wanted to, he can easily find excuses to get out of the sukkah and hang his hat on some halacha somewhere. Ella, but the reason why we don't is Yisrael Kadoshim. Yisrael are a holy people. Machmirim malatzmam, and they are stringent upon themselves. And they don't leave the sukkah. And one might add, at the end of the day, the reason why the Aruch HaShulchan makes this chlukim is because it doesn't want people to leave the sukkah. He wants people to stay. And says the Minchas Loz, Gam look your hedit. And like I mentioned from the Kotzker Rebbe, call me a hedjit, but I'm not leaving God's sukkah. So he's kind of saying a similar thing. And they'll accept upon themselves to be called hedjit. Call me a hedjit, call me immature. But b'shul mitzvah Hashem, I'm going to take that title if it means that through that I'm doing Hashem's mitzvah. HaChashuva, which is important, v'chaviva, and beloved aleim, onto the Jewish people. And if you want to tell them that they don't get reward because of that sukkah, because the water is being poured on the head, this is even a higher level of service from Hashem as mentioned before. No reward, and you still do it? Fantastic. And then he goes on to compare it to Shmini Atzeres, which is not important to our discussion. He compares why Shmini Atzeres, they don't sit in the sukkah in Munkach. At any rate, so at least now we have the perspective of the Hasidic perspective. And to sum it up, it goes something like this. Because, as he proves, it's not forbidden to leave the sukkah. How do I know it's not forbidden? Because the Gemara tells us it's not about us pouring the water on Hashem, but Hashem pouring the water on us. And because the rule is that no matter what a host says, you listen to him, with the exception of being told to leave the home. So Hashem is metaphorically pouring the water on your head, telling you, leave my home. And the Jew is persistent and says, I'm sorry, I love staying in your presence, and I'm staying here anyway. And moreover, because he has such joy from the mitzvah, it's the kind of joy that had he been reigning in his house, he wouldn't leave his house for that joy. And if that's the case, he has such joy from the mitzvah, what's a couple of drops of rain going to do for him? Or what's a lot of drops of rain going to do for him? It's a mitzvah. He feels the privilege to be able to serve Hashem, even if it means he's going to be called a hedjit. even if it means the Shulchan Aruch is going to call him a simpleton, and Hashem is pouring the water on his face, and he's not getting any reward, he loves Hashem's mitzvah and he's not leaving. That's the Hasidic perspective. And it's all based on the fact that, halachically speaking, it's not forbidden. Because if we're forbidden, then we wouldn't do it.
Hediyot means simpleton?
Hedjit means simpleton, but it's in a negative connotation.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a tam, which means simpleton, could be in a positive sense. He's innocent. Hedjit is simple in a negative connotation. That's why we used the word yesterday, mature.
Mm-hmm.
All right. At least we got some perspective. Have a wonderful day. And God willing, tomorrow we'll get back to the halacha of what kind of parchment we should be using for tefillin, what kind of parchment we use for mezuzah, what kind of parchment we should use for tefillin, for Sefer Torah, because that was the last issue we raised in our Gemara. And then God willing, we'll have time to get back to our Gemara. Have a wonderful day, everybody.
Go ahead.